Hello, creatives. I can't believe how quick July has flown by. We're going on the last week of July, and I think it's because I've been sick and a whole week went by. It was kind of lost in this sort of time warp, lost track of time. It's very strange to be sick in the summer when it's 90 plus degrees out. Anyway, I am feeling better now, and I really had the goal to get a couple of podcasts posted by the end of the month. So, this is what I'm doing. Even though I'm still recovering from my cold, I feel maybe sound a little congested. I got my tea to help me not cough, but I'm going to try to get through this podcast for you guys because I had this planned. I really wanted to get this topic to you because it's a topic that it's been talked about before, nothing new, but definitely something that cannot be ignored because I think it's important to really consider how it not only plays out in our creative life, but also plays out in our personal life too. So, before I get started, I want to thank all of you, those of you who are watching me on YouTube. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for watching. And also, those of you who are following me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Thank you so much for listening, and I appreciate all of you taking the time to listen to my podcast. I'm hoping that you find it helpful. And also know that just knowing you're out there listening really gives me some inspiration to continue this and also motivates me and energizes me to continue to just share stuff that I think would be helpful for your creative journey and development. So I just wanted to do a shout out to all of you and thank you for all of that. So this episode is a part one of two parts because I wanted to really just break it up into two parts. I'm going to go over my 12 steps to move from resistance to creative flow. I came up with this last year. I thought it was really helpful because when you just break it down, not only to break down what is resistance, what it looks like, how it affects you, but also break down why it's so important to have creative flow in your life. So that's why I wanted to talk about resistance and creative flow. So this is going to be part one. And then in part two, I'm actually going to give you a link to where you can download a PDF of all the 12 steps so that you have something that you can print out and actually read. But to start out, we really need to talk about what is creative flow. So creative flow is something that many artists we love being in the flow. We strive to get into that place of flow. Whether you're an actor, writer, artist, musician, singer, you know that you've experienced this at some point in your creative journey. And the reason why we love this space is because it is when we feel our creativity is the most effortless. But there's a science to this because psychologists, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his name. It's a tough name. Mihan Csikszentmihalyi, I think is something. He is the author of the Flow and Creative Flow books. Those books are really great to read. I'll warn you, they're pretty dense because he's got a lot of information in there about examples of creative flow and flow. So I'm just going to go through a couple of characteristics of what flow is. So flow is when you lose all sense of time. You lack hunger when you're in the middle of being fully immersed in the creative process. You feel re-energized versus drained. You have this sort of absence of feeling self-doubt, self-conscious, all self-criticism or judgment or insecurity is gone. You are not, when you're in the flow, none of that exists, right? You are just going through the motions and you're going through the flow, and creativity is just moving from one thing to the next effortlessly. You feel an ease and an effortlessness to the creative process, to what you're creating. You have no problem surrendering to the uncertainty, meaning you're not trying to control things, you're not trying to pre-map it, perfect it, overthink it. You just are approaching uncertainty with courage, with ease, and uncertainty isn't stopping you. You feel fully present and mindful with what you're doing. That's part of being able to step into the uncertainty without fear. And then also you feel a sense of oneness and wholeness. You're feeling really centered. You feel real grounded, which is very cool when you're in the flow. So that's flow. And now it's not just pertaining to anything creative. It can pertain to something that you're doing, whether you're in the garden and you're just in the flow of pruning your roses or planting your succulents. That can be a sense of flow. When you're stitching something or sewing something, working on a quilt, or maybe you're doing some repairs or additions to your house, whether it's painting the walls, you can experience a sense of flow even with some of those tasks. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what that is, how that is defined, and then you can kind of reflect on your own journey if you've experienced pockets of flow. So the benefits of flow, why it's important to have flow, is that in the midst of flow, it actually creates positive emotions. And positive emotions like feeling a great sense of satisfaction, joy. It gives you a sense of hope when you're in a state of flow. And then you feel like what you're doing has some great meaning to it because it just feels fulfilling. It gives you pleasure. It gives you a sense of calm. It increases your motivation and inspiration with what you're doing. You feel energized. It almost feeds back into your creativity. So the more ease of creativity in the creative process, the more creative you feel, the more creative you are. So, so there are benefits to experiencing this sense of flow. Now, the thing with flow is that it is not always easy to get into. I know for me, it can just happen out of nowhere. And then there's times when it's just not happening, and maybe it happens an hour into it, or I need a couple of hours. So for me personally, and maybe some people it's much easier to get into that place. I know specific art making can get me into the flow much easier. And that's something you want to think about. But the most common obstacle to flow is resistance. And resistance, this is a really interesting topic because I'm sure you've heard about resistance, and it's just something that comes with the creative process. So let's define resistance. Resistance is first off, it's very human, it's very natural to experience resistance because resistance is a natural human response to fear. And that could be fear of being uncomfortable, fear of anxiety, fear of failure, fear of embarrassment. It can show up whenever you are about to embark on something that is meaningful, to you that holds a lot of weight in terms of succeeding, like you really feel this pressure to succeed in it, that it is, linked to something that creates this, I guess, this pedestal of, oh, if I succeed or this project comes out perfect, it means that this, right? It means that I am a successful artist, I am creative, I'm talented, I don't suck. It's whatever we place value on it. So if there's a high value, if there's a lot at stake, resistance will show up. So Stephen Pressfield, who is kind of the expert, I would consider the expert in resistance, because he came up with the book, The War of Art. Here's the book, War of Art. And that whole book is about resistance. And he talks about resistance. If you haven't gotten this book, please check it out. Please get it, because it is so easy to get through, and you really understand what resistance is. Because resistance, I considered it kind of a trickster, and I'll get into it in a little bit. But I wanted to read a quote from what he writes in this book. Resistance is experienced as fear. The degree of fear equates to strength of resistance. Therefore, the more fear we feel about a specific enterprise or project, the more certain we can be that that enterprise is important to us and to the growth of our soul. That's why we feel so much resistance. If it meant nothing to us, there'd be no resistance. So what does resistance look like? Resistance can show up as procrastination. We all know what procrastination is. We've all experienced it at some point, right? Procrastination, putting that thing off that you know that if you just get that thing done, or you turn in that project, you know that it could be a step forward in your career, a step forward, or it can mean so much to you personally. So we tend to put it off. We're afraid of failing. So what we do is we procrastinate. Resistance can come off as rationalization, rationalizing. The reason why I didn't do that is because I don't have enough art materials. I just don't have enough time in my life to work on that book, or I'm really not good enough yet. It's rationalizing why we're not creating. Resistance can be self-criticism, like really just being hard on yourself and self-judging, thinking that you're not good enough in order to start, that you need to do more research. Here's a good resistance. I need to do more research, or I need to take another class, or I got to get better at this one skill before I can actually start the project or actually start the body of work. So it can be overthinking, over mapping it out, over planning out. And I know sometimes my resistance would play out where I'm organizing all my information so perfectly that I'm not even studying the information. I used to do this when it came time to do an exam. So that's an example of that resistance doesn't always show up in just creativity and the creative venture or activity. It can show up in different parts of our life. Like if there's a dream that we have not taken steps to make happen or manifest into our life, it can be the simplest dream. Like maybe you wanted to go visit someplace in the world that you really would have meant something personal to you. Maybe it meant something spiritual to you, but you have some fear around it. And then you're resisting even doing the research on finding how to get there, checking out the flights, checking out locations, places to stay or whatever. But it has a meaning, a really deep meaning for you. Like, I've always wanted to go resistance can show up in there. It can show up in, I really need to get out of this job. It's a getting me nowhere. I'm miserable. I'm not happy here. I need to find another job. But then you have resistance looking for that job, or going revising your resume, or signing up onto the websites that you need to find a new job because you fear having to deal with not feeling good enough, not having enough skills, coming down to feeling like you're going to fail and get rejected. Rejected is the fear of rejection is a big form of resistance. So I hope that that kind of gives you an idea of what resistance is. Resistance can come up in different ways, and I usually call it convenient distractions. Convenient distractions could be, well, I can't really do my art practice right now until I do the laundry, wash the dishes, clean the house, you know, do what I have to do first, which I agree is part of life, and it might have some reality to it. But sometimes what happens is we grasp onto those sort of convenient distractions to keep us in that safe place of not having to deal with resistance. Because there's so much invested in, if I go to the art table or my art studio or to the computer to write, to the laptop to write, it means that I actually have to face those uncomfortable feelings of not being good enough and all that. So we have resistance to that. And then we grasp onto these convenient distractions. And trust me, I've done that. I still do that. I tell my students, a lot of times when I'm ready to put together a body of work to show, I enter my studio, and sometimes what I do is I find myself sort of pacing around the studio looking for, well, this corner has to be reorganized, or this really needs to get cleaned up before I can actually start making art. And I noticed that I'll do that for hours. It's almost like pacing around, sort of going in this loop in my art studio. And I have to catch myself because I'm resisting. And I know that I'm distracting myself on purpose. So that's just an example. We have to really be careful of how resistance can justify these excuses to not create, to not step into that place of flow. Because here's the thing is, we can't get to flow if we can't get to just sitting down to do some sort of creativity, some sort of art practice, if we're not even getting ourselves into the art space, right? Because resistance is keeping us out of there. I mean, how many times, I don't know if you've done this, how many times have you gone past your art studio or your creative space, paused, and then said, oh, you know what, I need to do this first. And then you just kind of walk past the entrance. Or it's like you physically are resisting. So I'm giving you the sort of this picture of what resistance does, because resistance can be very good at defending the reason why you're not creating. And you have to really be aware of that. I think it's so important to be aware of when you're resisting, because the fact is, resistance is always going to be there. It's going to be a part of the creative process. You're always going to come up against it. And not only the creative process, but also in your life. It's going to come up throughout your life. Any form of resistance is going to come up throughout your life. Like, for example, if you want to get into a meaningful relationship, but you feel resistance because you don't feel like you're afraid of being rejected or not loved or not valued enough, or maybe you're afraid that that person won't like what they find out about you, or or whatever reason. So then you resist getting yourself out into the dating world, or posting that profile on a dating site. You just resist that. Being able to recognize that that's a block getting in the way of what you desire for your life, what you deeply desire. So that's why it's so important to recognize resistance in different ways, right? Well, and here's the thing with resistance also is a habitual way of thinking. So, we have neurological pathways in our brains that actually are automatic. This is why certain responses to certain things become automatic or unconscious, that we're not even aware of it, because it has become a habitual neurological pathway and a pattern of responding. The good news is we have decades now of research that shows that our brain can change. Brain plasticity, right? We've heard about it. It means that we can actually create new neurological pathways. So even if we have neurological pathways that habitually go to a place of resistance, we can actually change that pathway. We can almost create a detour for that pathway. Instead of going this way, we can actually change it and do a U-turn and make it do this. So what's great, but the only thing is that that requires sitting in that place of uncomfortableness. It means creating a opportunity to face that situation and do something different, and do that differently each time, so that you're actually shifting those pathways in your brain to think differently, to do differently. Now, here are some words to reflect upon. The more important a call to action is to our soul's evolution, the more resistance we will feel about answering it. But to yield to resistance deforms our spirit. It stunts us and makes us less than we are and were born to be. Stephen Pressfield. So I'm going to go over my first 6 steps in the 12 step from resistance to creative flow, so that we can just kind of break this down, and I'm hoping this really does help you. Because the important thing is that with resistance, it's going to require you to develop the muscle to show up, to face that uncomfortable feeling. Resistance keeps us from that uncomfortable feeling, right? It's a way of protecting us from failure, from having those uncomfortable feelings of feeling inadequate, not good enough, anxious. So we try to avoid those emotions, and so that's when resistance kicks in. But in order to bypass that, you really got to practice the muscle. You got to strengthen the muscle to, okay, I am feeling that right now, but I'm going to show up anyway. And I'm going to strengthen that muscle, so that the more you show up, the more, and that showing up is number one. The more you show up and strengthen that muscle, the easier it will be to, okay, resistance is there, but I can get through this. And then it also gives you the confidence that even though you're feeling resistance and anxiety around what you're about to do, it gives you the confidence of, I've been here before, I know what this is, I've gone through it, and I've been able to get to the other side. I just sit with it. Committing to showing up. Even when you don't know where to start, even if you don't have anything specific that you have to do or want to do, or even if you don't feel inspired, you show up. And showing up can be as simple as going to your creative space, going to your studio, going to your art table, and sitting down for 10 minutes. You don't have to do anything. You just sit there for 10 minutes. You don't have to have a project already ready to go. You don't have to even have your table or work area organized. You just sit there for 10 minutes. And during those 10 minutes, you just kind of glance around. You look around your studio, you look around at your work area, what's hanging on your walls, and you just sit there for 10 minutes. And even if you're feeling like some anxiety starting to come up, you want to bolt out of there, or, this is a waste of time. I really should use my time wisely, right? Resistance, the trickster trying to tell you not to sit there. Just sit there for 10 minutes. I believe that you will begin to get creatively itchy. You'll have the itch to do something creative, because maybe your eye will glance at something and say, oh, I forgot about that project, or I forgot about that thing. Oh, there's a pile of collage papers there that are just been sitting there, but look at that little piece sitting on top of that. That's kind of interesting. Or I remember that piece sitting on the wall. I'm reflecting back on how that happened, what inspired me, right? Stuff will start to begin to brew and things will start to surface. So number one, commit to just showing up without the expectation of starting anything. So that was number one. Number two is go through the motions. After sitting there for 10 minutes, now I want you to kind of go through the motion of just putting a couple of pieces, maybe just tearing pieces of collage paper and gluing them together. Or picking up your paintbrush and starting to put some watercolor in your art journal. Or opening up your art journal to a blank paper and doodling. Or getting a brush pen and starting to make marks, doing asemic writing, doodling or scribbling, right? Just go through the motions. You don't have to have a big project planned or anything huge to start. Just start wherever you are. If you're writing, just start free writing without thinking about misspelling or grammar or anything. You're just getting words down on paper. It's really just going through the motions and doing this for a minimum of 30 minutes where you're just going through the motions without expectations, without a plan. You're just kind of allowing yourself to play. So that's number two. Number three is check in with yourself. It's important to really recognize when resistance has come up. If you're feeling a self-doubt or self-criticism come up, or the feeling that, I should just quit. I should just leave and go do something more worthwhile. Or maybe you feel a little bit of shame around, gosh, I wish I would have been able to spend a lot more time doing what I love. And then you feel, shameful or regret, whatever it is. If you feel fearful of failing, you really want to check in and get in touch with what you're feeling and what the dialogue is saying. What is the voice in your head saying? And I want you to get that down on paper and start to write that stuff down. What happens, what I know for sure, is when this stuff stays in our head, the dialogue, the negative statements, the negative things you say to yourself, all that stuff stick in your head, it really starts to have more power over you. And when you get it down on paper, like externalize it, meaning externalizing it is a psychological term where we get it out of our head, out of here, onto paper. This is why art making is so important is that we get what's in here out on paper. When it's externalized, it starts to lose its power. When it's externalized, we're almost starting to shine light on the dark. Now it's out in the open. I can write down, I'm feeling like a failure right now. Or resistance is telling me I'm not talented enough. I'm not a good writer. I'm not a good musician. I'm not a good artist. Whatever it is, it's just getting it down on paper can begin to neutralize and diffuse the power that it has within us. Because sometimes resistance can be very intense in us that it blocks us. And it has power over us. We want to gain back that power and start creating again. So that's something that's important, is check in with yourself. What's going on? Really call it out. Write it down. Get it down on paper so that you can begin to neutralize it. So that's number 3. Number 4 is practicing self-compassion and loving kindness. This is something that I'll probably repeat over and over and over again because it is so natural for us as humans to go for the negative. It's so easy for us to focus on what is not enough. And it depends too on your life experiences growing up. If you didn't have enough positive support or encouragement, it's easy sometimes to go into comparison. Well, that person's doing that and I'm not that, or I'm not good enough. I'm not as good as that person, or I'm not as good as someone who has 20 years of experience. Whatever comparison, we have a tendency to be really hard on ourselves, harsh on ourselves. And I always want to encourage you to switch that to a positive. Really be compassionate to yourself and treat yourself with loving kindness. Be kind to yourself. Because I'm sure, and I'm guilty of this, spent many, many years of my life being hard on myself and not feeling valuable enough, not being enough, and then not really spending enough time giving me that self-care and that self-compassion. Because the self-compassion is important when you're growing, evolving, transforming, becoming, perfecting, right? When you're perfecting your craft, when you're learning something new, all of that comes with a messiness. All of that comes with being imperfect and struggling. So that's really important to remember, to give yourself a break. And also be kind to yourself. It's very important that you give yourself some self-love and some kindness when it comes to your development, because you're not going to know how to do it perfectly. And I'm not going to get into the whole perfection, but you're not going to do it to that level the first time. It all goes through steps and stages, and you got to give yourself that space to grow and to learn. So that's really important to remember. Here's another quote from Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art. Most of us have 2 lives, the life we live and the unlived life within us. Between the 2 stands resistance. All right, step 5, inquire with curiosity. So, if you're feeling self-doubt or self-criticism or anxiety, it's good to tap into that curiosity. Because if you get into a mind of curiosity, then you're just asking yourself questions. Well, what if I did a mark here? What if I took this pen or this mark making tool, dipped it in black paint, and just ran it across the page? What if I did that? Well, I wonder what would happen. Or, you know what? I have a box of those pastels sitting there. It's been sitting there for years. I've never used it. What if I open that up and start making marks on a paper and start moving that around and see what happens? What if I introduced that particular medium into what I'm already doing? It's curiosity. Or I've always been curious about doing black and white photography, and I want to put that into my art, or I want to integrate that with my poetry writing. I wonder what that would look like. Maybe I should do some research on that. Maybe I should take a look at what other people are doing with photography, and maybe I'll get inspired. It's the what ifs that you need to follow. And I know if you pause and listen to those what ifs, that if you follow that, because what happens is and this is very important to remember, that there is a certain level of shutting down that we've done out of fear of not having our dreams fulfilled. So those what ifs can lead to dreams, right? And if we feel like that's never going to happen, we start shutting down those what ifs. In other words, we shut down following those what ifs, and then we don't even hear them anymore. So it might be important for you to recognize the what ifs is really a curiosity, because I believe curiosity and creativity go hand in hand. Curiosity is creativity's voice saying, hey, check this out. I want you to take a look at this. This might spark a creative idea. This might get your creative spirit dancing. This might get your soul ignited, right? That is why it's important to follow the what ifs. That's one way of, combat, coming up against resistance, is you just go to the curiosity. That takes the pressure off also. All right, so number 6, let go of control. Now, resistance isn't only about getting started, trying to get started. Resistance can happen in the middle of flow. Like, for example, you got started writing and you're in the flow, and then all of a sudden you come to a screeching halt, and then the resistance is there. They go, shoot, I have to now tackle this particular topic or this particular chapter. Resistance is about that specific topic or chapter, and now you're paused, or you're in the flow of completely immersed in your artwork, and then all of a sudden you reach this place and there's resistance. And the resistance can show up in the middle of the creative process. That's why it's important to let go of control, because what happens when resistance shows up is we want to control. We tighten up, we get rigid, and we want to control the situation, because resistance is bringing up anxiety, self-doubt, all that stuff coming back, right? But remember, the goal is not necessarily to get rid of resistance. It really is developing the muscle to know how to work through it. So when those uncomfortable feelings return, especially when you're having fun, you're in the flow, you're really on a roll, and then resistance comes up again, and now you're faced with what did I just do? What I just did just looks like crap. All that self-doubt can return in the middle of the creative process. That's normal. It's important to let go of control. That's okay. I'm going to continue on, or you can just say, I'm going to take a break and maybe move on to something else. Give yourself permission to take a break from the piece that you're working on and do something else. Give yourself permission that, okay, the art piece just told me it needs to take a break, and this is as far as it wants to go. know how to pause, recognize it. It's important not to feel like, well, I'm just gonna will myself through this and get past this. And then what happens is when you force something to happen, it gets harder. I know when I force something to happen, things get worse on the surface, on the canvas, on the piece. I'm like, okay, I can't force this anymore. I need to take a break. So it's important to recognize when you're trying to control something and trying to force it to happen, then when it's important to let go and take a break. So those are the first 6 steps in moving from resistance to creative flow. I hope that you found that helpful. I'm glad I got through this without a coughing fit. So I'm going to, in my next episode, I'm going to go through the remaining 6. And I hope that you can kind of listen to this podcast again and really get a sense of being able to start to implement some of these steps whenever you feel resistance. And I'm going to also encourage you to even write or journal about resistance, because the more you recognize resistance comes up when it's there, the more you can shine light on it, the less power it's going to have over you as a creative spirit, over over the things that you want to achieve in your life. It's not going to block you anymore because you're starting to shine light on it. So really write about it, journal about it, become aware of it so that you can disempower resistance in your life. So I hope you found this helpful. Thank you for listening again. I appreciate all of you out there taking the time to watch this YouTube video, to listen to this podcast. So if you want any more information about my offerings, my online courses, I'm currently working on some new programs that I'm excited to get out. If you want to get on my email list so you can stay up to date, what I do is offer some discounts on my online programs. So you want to stay up to date to what's coming up. Please go to truecreativitywithin.com, get on my email list, and so that way you'll stay up to date. So until next time, stay creative, and I'll see you next time. Bye.